Thank you very much. That was really excellent, and I think sets the scene very well for the rest of the morning. So our next session now is the Place Agenda panel session, and I'm conscious we are behind time, but I'm sure we can make up for that over lunch, etc. So I want us to be able to still give the appropriate amount of time to the next agenda item. So I'd like to welcome Rachael Greenwood, who's Director of Midlands Engine Partnership, who you're beginning to get a sense of as an organisation, to come up and chair and introduce the panel session today.
Thank you, Pauline. I'm Rachael Greenwood. I'm the Executive Director of the Midlands Engine Partnership, and it's my privilege to be here this morning. My privilege too to be chair of the already mentioned this morning Midlands Engine Health Partnership. I'm looking forward to hosting the panel. Some fantastic contributions, conversations that will be thought-provoking and offer insights, I'm sure. I've got a number of questions that I will put to my panel this morning. And then there's an opportunity for you to ask some questions to our panel members directly. But before getting into conversation, I'd like to introduce my esteemed colleagues this morning, who I'm very grateful to for volunteering their time to be part of the discussion today. My panel members are Rachael Tyrrell, Assistant Director of Knowledge Exchange at Research England, Professor Simon Collinson, the Deputy Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the University of Birmingham, sat with Dr. Ben Martyn, who is Cluster Development Manager at the Northern Health Science Alliance, and Michael Wood, who is Head of Health Economic Partnerships at the NIHR Confederation, and last but never least, Professor Michael Lewis. Too many titles to mention, as have most of my panel members, but here this morning in his capacity as Joint Director of the NIHR. So I'll go straight on to my panel questions, conscious of time this morning, and perhaps I'll direct my first question to Rachael and then to Mike, if I may. So, what is the role of innovation and knowledge exchange in the Place Agenda, and how can the Midlands more effectively engage with this in the health and life sciences sector? Rachael, over to you.
Thank you. So some first initial comments would be that innovation is a very broad umbrella term, as we're all aware, so it includes knowledge exchange and research and development, R&D, and definition of knowledge exchange would be research organisations and universities coming together to work with external partners. There's also, of course, the broader innovation and enterprise agenda. It's very wide. It doesn't fully sit within the Research and K funders' remit, so UK Research and Innovation, for which I'm from and represent. And those innovation and enterprise agendas are still very key to play. So as we were talking about earlier, the importance of local partners in providing business support to local businesses. So I work for a national funder, UK Research and Innovation, and Research England as part of that. And place can be a factor in the design of our national programmes. It's noted in government strategies. I think we're all awaiting the forthcoming Levelling Up white paper. Across UKRI, the programmes are very different. They meet high-level policy aims and objectives that differ widely depending on their remit. So it's a case of not one size fits all for this type of activity. I'm delighted to be the Programme Director of the UKRI Strength in Places Fund. That's a bespoke programme where place is baked in to the design of the programme. It's integral to the business cases that are put forward to us, that are mixtures of businesses, research organisations involving universities, and crucially local partners who come together and propose to us activities and partners within a self-defined economic geography, so not constrained to regions or any sort of perceived boundary within the UK. So it's thinking about creating local effects and then national and international. And Strength in Places, SIPF, is designed to align with other funding streams and other activities that are going on. So it provides a kind of coherent package of support for areas right across the UK. At Research England, we've been considering the role of place in university performance in knowledge exchange as part of our knowledge exchange framework. And we've also recently been commissioning reports into looking at place factors within knowledge exchange as part of evaluating our large-scale formula funding, which goes out to universities across England. I wanted to highlight RED as well. It's a collaborative fund where we work with universities as partners to look into issues, including local issues and place-based opportunities. So I'd highlight the WM Ready Centre, of course, which Simon is a director of, and also a centre in health and life sciences led between MedCity and NHSA, which of course Ben would be involved in, led by Kings and Newcastle. And in RED, we've noted that we currently have an absence of projects in international knowledge exchange. It is a defined priority for us. I'm sure it's quite complex to bring about and to arrange, but it's something that we note is a gap in our remit at the moment. And I think my last point I would make is perhaps considering how an area like the Midlands could come together and where should the focus be. I'd suggest that it's not a binary consideration about whether you wish to have a local or, say, an international impact. That by building up local strengths, will help to attract international collaborators, investors, and companies. And Strength in Places is an example of that. The primary benefit has to be to the local area. It's a place-based fund, but absolutely it can then lead to and should lead to national and international outcomes.
Thank you, Rachel. So the notion of place really inextricably linked to levelling up, and as you say, we are expectant of a white paper which may bring some further insights. But Mike, I'm going to bring you in now, if I may, and if I can, perhaps just reflect back on Professor Johnson's remarks around research and readiness and encouraging researchers in our region and making sure that we aspire to facilities. It struck me there's a juxtaposition there a little bit between actually we've got an incredible, remarkable, capable community of researchers in our region, and we've got some of the best infrastructure, but still taking the Midlands as a whole and sectors as a whole, we are the lowest recipient of any region in the UK of R&D funding from public sector sources. So £1 in London of private sector investment leaves us £1 of public sector investment, as it does in Scotland. But in the Midlands, it takes £4 of private sector investment to leave us just £1 of public sector money. So thinking about our involvement, how we get engaged from a place point of view and within health and life sciences, that's a bit of a juxtaposition, isn't it? How can we respond?
First of all, I'm going to say, if you're listening to Kate Bingham this morning on Radio 4, I'm one of those horrible industrialists that turned into a government person. So if you heard that, then that's me. My career is industry, so excuse me if I give you some blunt answers about what I think. We have 7 medical schools here. We have the second largest clinical trials cluster in the whole of Europe, even though we're not part of it. So we got some real strengths there, and we have the tools for innovation, but I'm not sure we're using them optimally. If we have a look around, we've got quite a lot of fragmentation. So we appear with lots of different voices, and we appear with lots of words. You speak to some of the people. I speak to people in OLS and the CAB office and Treasury as well. And they hear some of the same things coming to them for investment through multiple sources. So they're a little bit unlinked at times, and I think we could do a lot more to do that, to get some linkage. If you have one voice and one message and one agenda and one strategy, it's a lot easier for people to digest. And people in government who are giving these funds away, they've got lots of applications. We did a panel last week for funding with NIHR. We looked through about 80 different applications. I mean, there's a lot of noise, so you've got to have a really clear, tight message if you want to get through and get some of the funding. So you've also got to pick some winners as well. You can't compete on every single agenda. You've got to pick some winners. There's no point thinking you're going to build the next AstraZeneca £1.1 billion research headquarters. You're not. You're going to have to think about what you can win. And the winning areas, we heard from Anne earlier on about things like diagnostics. There is no place really in the UK right now for a diagnostics coalition and a centre. We could be that. Social care research is going to be really important. So pick a winner and be the centre for social care research. Or just be the best place for clinical trials, which will pull in a lot of money. So pick a winner. The other thing I'd say as well is be ambitious. When I first went to work for Birmingham University, I can see Elliot sitting in front of me right now, and I think he was in the room when somebody said this to me. I said, how would you describe University of Birmingham? And they said, it's not as bad as it used to be. Now, that sort of tells you a lot about levels of ambition as well. You've got to have an ambition if you want to be seen and heard. It's the same amount of work to put together an application for a £5 million centre as it is for a £50 million centre. A £5 million investment as a £50 million investment. Go big, be ambitious, be brave, and follow the money as well. I think if you can talk with one voice and have one mission and have some objectives and some focus, I think we'll do a lot better than we have. And it's right, we have been underinvested. You're right that it takes a lot more money to generate backing as well in this area. But there are some success stories. There's a company called Quanta, I'm not sure if you know them. Quanta, they do a home dialysis machine, brilliant West Midlands company, just raised £248 million in a private placing, secondary placing. They're really motoring in the medical devices area. And that could be a real strength for us, especially as we've got about 30,000 jobs involved in it. We generate about £1.6 billion for the economy. Just think what we could do if we really supercharged it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mike. My next question will pick up on the theme of levelling up, which has been raised a number of times already this morning, and probably pull out some of the points that you've raised, Mike, and your feedback too, Rachel. And perhaps I'll address this to Simon first, and then Michael, if I may. So what would delivering levelling up mean to the Midlands economy, Simon?
Thanks very much. Good question. Lots of people talking about levelling up. I think we need to define it, and certainly part of that definition, as we've already talked about, is the imbalance of public sector funding, including public sector funding in R&D in different regions of the country. But I prefer a two-part definition that really encompasses outcomes from levelling up if it were achieved. The first is actually to improve the competitiveness and the ability of regions outside London, the South East, to become more productive, to become more competitive, to attract more foreign direct investment, to improve the skill base and so on. And frankly, by doing that, they will increase the number of high-income, high-value employees in the region, and that's necessary for this kind of sector. But the second part of the definition is around rebalancing inequalities of outcomes, and that includes health outcomes. So there are massive disparities, and they've grown since 2008 and accelerated through COVID between the wealthier, the healthier, the higher skilled, the higher income individuals in various regions and within regions, and those who have much higher levels of deprivation, using the index of multiple deprivation. And there's a strong clustering, and that's getting worse. So in some ways, these are outcomes that affect people's health, but they stem from employment and skills and various other things. So if we take those two things, what does levelling up mean? Well, first of all, this sector in the Midlands region represents about just over 20 billion of GVA. That's gross value added. That's a measure of the scale of the economy, but also our efficiency in this sector. That's about 8.6% of our economy, and it's higher than the national average. Similarly, it's about 13.5% of our employment, and that's higher than the national average. We already have a strong concentration of particular areas of medtech and life sciences. So if you take the fact that nationally in the last decade the sector grew at about 8%, take that 8% growth and it would give us an additional at least 1.5 billion of GVA in the region. And you're looking at 8,000 to 10,000 direct jobs by 2030. That's direct jobs. The important thing about this sector, though, is that it tends to be much higher GVA than the national average and the local average. So the more people we can attract to the region or retain in the region that are working in this sector, the higher not just the direct employment benefits are, but the higher the indirect multiplier effects for other jobs in a region. And we measure these, we evaluate these, this is what my institute does, and so your impact is going to be a lot greater if you can create those multiplier effects. So the first issue is sort of, fairly straightforward to look ahead, and if we grew faster than the national average, we'd do even better. It would become even bigger as part of our economy. I think just before I talk about the other side of levelling up, the reducing inequalities, skills is a massive challenge. Skills are in huge shortfall in particular areas, not just generically digital skills, but a whole range of skills that feed into this sector are short nationally and particularly locally. And there's a number of pieces of data I'm not going to throw at you now, but show that we've got particular shortfalls in areas that if we don't fill, there will be demand by firms, they will be able to grow, but there'll be a lack of skills to fuel that growth, particularly in our region. So, levelling up in terms of reducing inequalities, a bit more complicated. We need to maximise these multiplier effects. You have to increase your use of local suppliers, local contractors. You need to create spillover effects to low-income sectors and services. You have to upskill. You have to invest money in upskilling, and you have to incentivise firms, potentially also universities, to upskill in the areas where demand is going to be greatest. And then lastly, I think what's interesting about this sector, I think really importantly, is that if you direct some of the diagnostic tools, some of the customised, personalised innovations in medicine that we're seeing now, if you direct them much more towards that low-income, low-skilled, higher deprivation groups who have low health outcomes, you're going to regionally or nationally have better outcomes. So there's a direct effect from life sciences by focusing some of your innovations on those particular groups in the economy. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon. So some challenges in terms of tackling the skills gap that we know we have in the region, but it can contribute quite directly to levelling up, and an opportunity perhaps for investors and for government to help grow the life sciences sector in the region, a high productivity sector. I think you will correct me if I'm wrong, Simon, because you know these numbers better than me, but the average DVA per job in the Midlands is about 32,000. The average DVA per job in life sciences, or in med tech as an example of that, is about 69,000 DVA. So you can see how very quickly creating numbers of jobs, just as you said, could create a step change very fast. So yes, an opportunity, the gauntlet down to government to help us grow our life sciences sector. Our businesses are doing sterling work already. So Michael, with your NHS Confederation perspective, how would you respond to the levelling up challenge for the Midlands?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Good morning, everyone. I'll make 3 quick points and then bring that together. I think the first point, the regional disparities in productivity behind levelling up, they're not new, are they? We were looking at these over the past decade. We've been addressing these. Perhaps what is new now is the breadth of the understanding between health and wealth. In my national role before COVID, I was trying to talk to our economic leaders, developing local industrial strategies, strategic economic plans about the value of health in its broadest sense. And often what I got back was a very narrow definition of where health should fit in those. So the issues we just heard from Professor Dayman were not routinely at the heart of economic place strategies. And I think what I would see now is that greater, broader understanding of the intrinsic links between health and wealth is new. And I would hope those conversations are easier now. Easier for me to have, and the fact we're having them here today shows that they're already happening. I think linked to that, and particularly here in the Midlands, that excellence at the heart of the pandemic's response between the NHS, universities and academia, as we've heard this morning from Sir John, absolutely fantastic. But inequalities are still widening. People are leaving the labour markets earlier, life expectancy stalling. They are very personal stories. They also severely affect productivity. So actually, innovation needs to be at the heart of what we do, but demonstrable local impact, sustained local impact needs to be at the heart of what we do. And to do that, certainly statutory organisations, institutions like the NHS, we need to understand and connect with our communities in different ways. And that brings me on to my third point, which is actually, well, how is levelling up going to be felt? Now, if you look at all the polling of communities, of the people in our different towns and cities across the Midlands, it's going to be the response you get is hyper-local. You are talking the safety and cleanliness of your high streets, skills, opportunities. So we might want to focus our attention on the big ticket strategic stuff. Given where we are in a political cycle, it may well be the success of these small social initiatives first, which are the determining factor on whether government can even get to the big ticket stuff. So we have macro and micro challenges, I think, facing us in the coming years. I think place is fascinating because that's the only part often at which government policy meets. It certainly doesn't meet in Westminster. It meets, so we have the ability to bring all those together, to work across sectors, share a vision, understand what success looks like, what our externalities look and feel like. And I think our job in this room actually is to understand, the economic and social products and benefits and value of what we bring, because that's how you will get public and private and academia together in a room. And embedding those health and wealth principles at every level, from the region right down to the hearts of our communities, is truly what this region needs to really understand how levelling up can make a difference. And it has to be felt in more than just GVA, because that's what the people in our towns and communities will be telling us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Michael. I love that phrase, sustained local impact. That should make its way into some policy somewhere soon. And we've spoken before about the role of NHS institutions in contributing to the economy and the wider impacts, the wider role they can have within their communities. And I think that is absolutely key. In parts of our region, health and social care, life sciences, medtech employ maybe 15%, 18% of they're the offer of all of those jobs. So a really significant contributor on so many levels. Thank you. My final question then, and then there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions that you might have been scribbling for our panel. I will ask Ben, if I may, and that is, we've been speaking about levelling up this morning. What role do our regions have in achieving levelling up? And are there any UK or international models of excellence in life sciences that you could point us to? Ben?
I'll do my best. Good question. Morning, everyone. So I think, as Simon said, there's sort of two dimensions that we can talk about around levelling up, in terms of levelling up our economy versus tackling our health inequalities. I'm going to just mention the health inequality side of things first, and then talk a little bit more about the economic side and kind of how to drive innovation, which is sort of more my bread and butter day-to-day job. But I think, so the bad news, I suppose, first in terms of health inequalities, I think that the role that regions can play in directing that is slightly limited. I think that this is a huge, deep-seated issue. Obviously, my background is knowledge about the North, so I'm going to quote some facts about the North for you. But we've had a health life expectancy gap in the North for as long as record keeping has begun. The NIHR published a report in 2018 showing that 30% of the productivity gap in the North is down to ill health in the North. So it's not just a health issue, it is also an impact on our economy. And I think when I was thinking about the second part of your question, international examples, if we think about the unification of East and West Germany, so East Germany had a life expectancy gap of about 4 years, and productivity in East Germany was about 60% of productivity in West Germany. And over the sort of last 2 decades or more, they've basically eliminated that health gap, and they've raised productivity from that 60% to about 85%. So they've made massive progress. But they spent the equivalent of £7 billion a year doing that. And I think at the moment our sort of national levelling up fund is sort of something about 4 billion total. So I think we need to be, as regions, honest about the scale of the problem and communicating that out. So that was sort of the slightly downer news, but then I'll try and go into the more positive side. So I think in terms of my focus really is in sort of driving innovation and innovation in life sciences to help tackle that economic sort of deficit. And for those that don't know the NHSA, we've been around for 11 years, currently part funded through Research England, thank you very much. And we bring together 10 research-intensive universities, 10 research-intensive NHS trusts and the 4 HSNs in the north of England, and bring them together in that collaborative model that we've been talking about all morning, and in a similar way that Midlands Engine Health are doing, to understand what our assets are, what our real strengths are, what the opportunities to growth are, what the barriers to that growth is, and crucially, is it relevant for us to come together as a network to tackle those challenges? And if the answer is no, then our individual city regions or members will crack on. But if the answer is yes, then we have a role to play in bringing those organisations together to place those big bets that Mike mentioned, to be ambitious and build on what our region can contribute towards the UK national life science offer, which can then compete on a global scale. And I think so one thing that regions can do is recognise the value of, we talk about anchor institutions and the different stakeholders, understand the ecosystem that our organisations like Midlands Engine are kind of stewards of that ecosystem, and bring all of those assets together. But then also talk between regions, and we do this, and we work very closely with MedCity and with you guys to understand how does our offer in advanced therapies fit with the Midlands offer in advanced therapies and the London offer in advanced therapies, and also beyond just life sciences. So we know that to drive innovation forward, you need to get academics for the sort of clinical rigor validation of your innovation. You need clinical input and evaluation and understanding of how it's going to be adopted and implemented. But you also need capital providers to finance that innovation, and you need engagement with government regulators. And so our organisations that play that connecting role can actively work to bring those key stakeholders together. And then, I've lost my... and I want to pick up on something that you mentioned. So you said that £4 of private investment in the Midlands brings £1 of public investment. And I think we see a similar distribution across all of the regions outside of the southeast, and particularly London. And I kind of think it's worth flipping that on the head, that generally we think about investing public R&D funding to stimulate private R&D investment. And so the Midlands clearly has got something that industry is willing to pay for, and they're willing to come here and pay to do it.
Definitely.
And so regions need to understand what that is and tell that to the centre and tell that to the world and compete on a global scale. And I think we can do that. So that's the positive side of my talk.
Thank you, Ben. You touched on the sort of systemic issues in terms of health inequalities in the regions, and the sort of they're extant, aren't they? Perhaps what we can do, something we've talked about, is do more perhaps together to shine a light on those, because they are common. And goodness me, you know, the North and the Midlands combined an enormous voice, an enormous opportunity into government to be able to identify these stubborn challenges which do need some serious focus if we're going to overcome them. And you, of course, touched on collaboration. It's what you do in your day job, it's what I do in mine. There are many opportunities there, and bringing, others have spoken this morning about harnessing the phenomenal creativity, innovation and power within our business community, combining that more overtly with academia, and doing more with our public sector and public health environments. So many opportunities ahead. It's a very exciting time. So unless my panel have any other reflections on those questions, I will open to the floor. There are some hands up already, and there's some mics. So perhaps if you could just introduce yourself, and if you have a preference to whom you would direct your question.
Hi, I'm Ivana Poparic. I work with MedCity, which is a London cluster organization. I would actually challenge Ben on the East-West Germany point. The life expectancy gap is still quite large. It's 6 years between regions like Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg compared to the east of Germany. What has changed is people's perception. So people in the east now are happier with the care that they're provided, and they see the care that they receive, although for the long-term conditions it's still much worse in terms of the health outcomes. They think they're receiving a better care, because those issues that they had over the last 30 years are being addressed. So I think one of the challenges is also the perception. A lot of what drives the, investment into the South is actually not driven by policy, it's driven by industry, like many people have suggested. And industry still today wants to be located in London because of the, first the research expertise, but also a number of other companies who are already in the South Golden Triangle region. So I think you need to be also looking at changing the perception, not just pushing for more investment. Thank you.
Thanks, Ilana. So I'm very happy to be corrected on my knowledge of East-West German, because I looked at, there's a paper by Claire Bambra talking about different examples of levelling up around the world, which is really interesting, and that was sort of what I looked at, but I'm very happy to be wrong. I think you definitely hit on a really key point, which is that it's the narratives that we tell and the way that we project ourselves into the world, and that tends to attract investment. I think that you can see a really strong example of that in our region. So in the northeast, Ben Houchen, the mayor of in the northeast, has really, in the way that I described, looked at what the assets are within his region, brought them together, and then started to project that into the world. And so the northeast, and I think it's Teesside specifically, is now the only part of the UK where FDI is growing at a rate greater than in London. You can check the statistics and tell me I'm wrong later, Ivana, but something like that. So I think it's that ambition and the way that we project ourselves into the world is really important. In terms of your point around kind of agglomeration and clustering, and the fact that the southeast has skills and infrastructure and companies, and I think again that's is one of the reasons that businesses work there. It's one of the reasons that we see, for example, AstraZeneca opened a £1 billion discovery centre in Cambridge yesterday, and it's something that we think about a lot in the NHSA, is how do we create a environment for people to come and do high-risk work, but in a low-risk environment, because they have the networks and the connections and the other companies in other sectors and the ability to find out what's going on, and if your stage 3 clinical trial falls through, you've got somewhere else to go. You can continue doing the work that you care about, but within your sort of cluster and region. But I do think that it is important to recognise that over half of our R&D spend goes to the southeast, and that isn't necessarily always related to where industry are investing, like that £4 to £1 figure, and that public investment in R&D and the infrastructure that we build, and it's also more than just the R&D infrastructure, it's transport and things like that, have an effect on the ability of a place to retain the skills and talent that exists. And so I think we're in a really privileged position at the moment, in that we've decided to become global Britain superpower, science superpower. We are very strong, and our government is looking to put extra money into the system, so we don't need to level down anywhere to have an impact. So we can have sort of an honest conversation about how we deliver best for life sciences across the whole of the UK, I think. I'll stop.
Thanks, Ben. So perception, I think, is really key. And Mike, you mentioned earlier, 1,000 whispers or one voice, and being ambitious, picking your winners. I think that's got to be hand in glove with the move away from self-validating prophecies. We think X is a great place to invest in from a public sector R&D perspective, so we'll carry on investing there. We always get the predictable prizes, so we'll carry on investing there. And we must challenge the notion that industry wants to be in London, because we have got the biggest medical technologies cluster in the Midlands, second to nowhere in the UK, and 33,000 high-quality, high-skilled jobs right here. So, playing back some of those strengths, making more noise about them, I think definitely is an opportunity as we go further forward. Mike, did you want to come in?
You've got to think about what's the next things that we need to invest in, what are the areas that we need to look at. And you've got to be blind if you didn't watch COP26 recently and hear all the words about sustainability. You see this in the NHS as well, net zero by 2030. if you can combine looking at health research and sustainability, and pick whatever angle you want on that, whether you want to think about recycling gases or medicines or whatever, there's something there, and that fits in with the industrial base as well. Then you think about data as well. We've got a really interesting population here, which is very, very diverse. You don't have that in Oxford and Cambridge. They all look like me. Yeah. So you've got to go, if you're thinking about doing research in a diverse environment so that you can then sell your products somewhere else to a diverse environment, this is a perfect test bed for it. So start selling the data that you have, and that's a real industry. High GVA, great jobs, but they're good, solid jobs as well. They're not transient jobs. They're not working at Wetherspoons. These are solid jobs with a purpose, with a social impact that can impact globally. So it's not just about the GVA. It's about all the other things as well. But I go back to the thing I said at the beginning. You have to start picking some winners and focus on those, and then just let other people be strong at their things and pick the strong things we want to be strong at. Like we did with the motor industry. We were strong in that because we focused. Now we have to pick our life science winners.
Thank you, Mike. Super. Are there any more questions? I think there's one more. Oh, there's a couple. Somebody pick. We'll take one more, and then I think we'll probably be moved on by Pauline.
Hello, my name's Alice Fletcher Etherington. I work in the policy team at the Academy of Medical Sciences. As Anne so nicely said in her presentation, at the Academy we're really interested in what the new reforms, so the health and social care reforms and also the public health reforms mean for kind of the challenges that are facing the ecosystem. And I'd be really interested in what the panellists think about what are the key kind of challenges and opportunities that are posed by these reforms on perhaps levelling up specifically, seen as that's been such a key topic for discussion today. So perhaps Simon and Michael might be able to answer these questions, but I'd be interested in what anyone thought.
I'm not an expert on social care reform, I'm afraid, so I'm not the person to ask.
Shall I say a bit of, and the last thing I intend to do is give you an in-depth breakdown of, another NHS restructure. But there is something really interesting in the health and care bill that's going through Parliament, which is, if you look, we're going to have in England 42 statutory integrated care systems, in the Midlands 11, that's an awful lot, 11. One of the 4 key principles of an integrated care system will be to support the NHS to maximise its role in economic and social development. That's one of only 4 key principles. That's the least defined principle, quite rightly, because the NHS doesn't yet know where its value is to be found in this. So I'm working with NHS England and we're running some roundtables to try and understand quite what the messaging, the metrics, the motives behind this key principle is. And what's really interesting, the voices of the non-NHS colleagues have to be heard in that. What is the industry ask of the NHS? What is the academic ask of the NHS? Because we don't know. We are place blind too often in how we make our decisions. So that is a key point. So the one takeaway is that one of the 4 key principles of a new statutory health and care partnership is to get my sector to dance to the economic and social tune. So I'll leave it there. That should be resonating in your minds next time you speak to the NHS.
Thank you, Michael. That's a challenge, I think, and an opportunity, and certainly an area we've talked about around the Midlands Engine Health table. There's much to be done, but I think there is an invitation from the NHS for participation, collaboration, and partnership like never before. Well, it remains with me then just to thank my panellists for fantastic contributions and insights this morning. Thank you for your questions. And I'll hand back over to Pauline.
Lovely, thanks very much, Rachel. Just a couple of things I want to say before we head off for some refreshments. So just to remind you that after our refreshment break, we've got our breakout sessions, and we'll have the collaboration session will be here in the Imperial Suite, and then the other 2 sessions are in the 2 rooms at the back of the hall, so if you just go up those stairs. And we've got the Balacrane room with health and social care innovation and the Bracebridge room with inward investment. Can I just then say lunch will be in the exhibition and hall outside, along with the poster presentations. But during that time, just to let you know that we'll be having the Big Ask pitching session, which will take place in here from 1:15. So if I can thank again all of our speakers this morning for a really great, interesting discussion, and we'll close this part and welcome everyone to go and have some refreshments. Thank you.